Okay. Um, it seems that everything is fine now. Thank you very much for your patience and welcome to the 5th edition of the Summer Training School of the International Master Degree in Security and Human Rights here at the University of Tuscia Dike Department. It's my great pleasure to welcome to the University of Tuscia all of you, international students, master students, PhD candidates, expert practitioners, and fellow distinguished colleagues. As you may see, we are on hybrid mode, so there is part of the audience online. So greetings to you all online. I hope you can hear us and see us well. And of course, there is a lot of people here in room 6 at San Carlo venue in Viterbo. This intensive 5-day course has been organized and promoted by the research project of national interest on community sponsorship for migrants in Europe. The acronym is COSME, which I coordinate here at the University of Tuscia, and which collaborates with other two universities, the University of Bologna and the University of Turin, in collaboration with the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence on the Integration of Migrants in Europe, which is directed by Professor Mario Savino here at University of Tuscia. So my greetings are also on behalf of Professor Savino, who couldn't make it today. The 2025 Summer Training School aims to provide you with a conceptual and a theoretical toolbox to expand knowledge about resettlement, legal pathways, complementary pathways, and the multidimensionality of community sponsorship and competing models in Europe. Community sponsorship is a concept which encompasses all forms of private and public partnership aimed at promoting protected entry, first reception, and durable integration for migrants and refugees in Europe. Community and private sponsorship was established back in the 70s in Canada, and was established to help resettle the Indo-Chinese refugees that were escaping the war in Indochina. It was established as a voluntary scheme, and it was a responsibility and solidarity mechanism. In Europe, it became popular very late compared to the inception back in the 70s, in the aftermath of the so-called Syrian crisis back in 2015. And it provided an additional legal route for Syrian refugees, offering an alternative to the externalization of asylum responsibility. The national experiences on community sponsorship, legal pathways, complementary pathways, led to the adoption within the new Pact on Migration and Asylum of the idea of crafting a European model of community sponsorship as opposed, if not differentiated from the Canadian one. But what is in this European model? This is one of the answers we will try to provide during this summer training school. The Commission recommendation on legal pathways has further prioritized the goal of developing a European model of community sponsorship as a sort of flexible concept that comprises a variety of national resettlement schemes, humanitarian admission mechanisms, and other forms of legal and complementary pathways for protection seekers. These schemes share the characteristics of transferring part of the authority and responsibility from public entities and agencies to private people and also grassroots organization. Thanks to a flexible design, community sponsorship can support different forms of protected entry. We have already mentioned resettlement, but also labor pathways are another way of, attaining the goal of community sponsorship. And community sponsorship can have a role also in cases of mass displacement. That's why, following the so-called Ukrainian crisis in 2022, which triggered the activation of Temporary Protection Directive in Europe, public-private cooperation and partnerships have been boosted to manage the mass flows of Ukrainian refugees escaping the war caused by the Russian Federation. Specific mechanisms have been created at the European level, such as the Solidarity Platform in the aftermath of the Ukrainian war, which aim to facilitate the exchange between public and private entities to assist the integration process of Ukrainian citizens. Community sponsorship is thus providing a multi-purpose tool, widening legal channels of access for refugees and other categories of migrants alike. However, it does not come without hindrances and problems, because this is an administratively very complex instrument, and the functioning of community sponsorship and competing models is linked to contextual specificity, is linked to the feature of specific regions and areas in Europe. The scope, content, viability, and implication of a European model are therefore still uncharted. And it's one of the more topical and expanding field of research in the framework of migration and asylum policies in Europe. So having all of this in mind, this course will explore the following 4 key dimensions. The first dimension is the European Union's contribution to the design and standard setting of sponsorship-based pathways, so pathways in which there is a contribution by private entities, and we will see which kind of contribution. The relationship between admission, first reception, and durable integration. So community sponsorship and legal pathways do conceive the migration journey as a whole of route situation. They do look at the migration process, starting from the departure to the arrival and post-arrival situation. So it's very complicated to trace all the different legal and political issues that may arise at the different stages of the pathways. We will also look at the impact of fragmentation, because those schemes are mostly national, and we are searching for a European model, but there is no one yet. And therefore, there is a lot of fragmentation to be coped with that might have an impact on the stability of rights and protections and shelter. And last but not least, we will look at the principles and values that underpin the creation of a common European model. So what are the legal foundation of a potential European model? All those dimensions will be analyzed from a variety of angles, so including the legal angle, but also political, social, and economic perspective, involving leading scholars, academics, practitioners, and experts in migration and asylum law and practice. The teaching program will be offered during the mornings. So the morning session begins today. And today we will offer you some preliminary reflection on the definition of community sponsorship and competing models. Tomorrow we will examine the selection process. So how do we select people to be included in community sponsorship pathways and other legal pathways? For instance, humanitarian admission and labor pathways, considering all the key legal aspects and procedural fairness and non-discrimination issues. On 2 and 3 July, the summer school will host a lecture dedicated to a comparative analysis of the working of those models in different geographical areas beyond Europe. And we will consider South-South and North-South models of community sponsorship and other legal pathways, including resettlement. And finally, on the 4th of July, we will identify and discuss the potential feature for a common European sponsorship model. This is the program, the teaching program in a nutshell. Some of the guest speakers will be here in presence. Some others will be joining us remotely. In any case, all the lectures will last around 1 hour, leaving half an hour for debate. And I strongly encourage you to take the chance to make questions, to ask questions, and to get the most out of this experience. Because one of the key aims of the summer training school is to provide all of you a mixed, balanced, understanding of theoretical and practical issues. So combining seminars and training sessions, making them as interactive as possible. To this end, we have designed, apart from the morning session, also the training session, in which you will experiment with different advanced brainstorming and co-creation techniques. The afternoon training session will be held during the first 4 afternoons, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And we'll explore the same topics of the morning sessions with an operational perspective. This will allow all of you to master negotiation, drafting, and dissemination techniques. You will be divided into working groups to work in different breakout rooms if you are online or on site, under the coordination of the school's trainers, who are going to be around and who are the pillar, the core pillar of this summer training school. So more precisely, you will be given a specific task to draft and present a policy paper on the implementation of the European Union resettlement framework on the first 2 afternoons of the summer training school, and to run a roundtable on better strategies for early integration of asylum seekers on the second 2 afternoons. All group activities have been designed with geographical and gender diversity in mind, which are intrinsic value of the summer school. So you will be divided into groups taking into account those aspects, which are key for the successfulness of the training exercises. All training activities are competitive and adversarial. So the trainings will announce the winning group At the end of each training session, the best outcomes, so the winning groups, will have the opportunity to have their work published online on the official websites of the projects hosting the summer training school, so the Into.me Center of Excellence and the COSME project. So please engage in these afternoon activities, because this might be really rewarding for you and leaving a trail for future students. The training session, as I said, will be supported and coordinated by the school's trainers. And I want to mention all of them because I'm really thankful, grateful to them. So Nicolò, Alessia, Giampiero, Francesco, sorry, Tamta and Marilu. Tamta is just joining next to me, but you will meet them all in the coming days. And in meanwhile, you can start familiarizing with their faces through the booklet you have received, which is a key tool detailing the teaching and training programs. You will find all information also on the training programs and the link to the reading materials. I kindly invite you to start downloading and opening all the reading materials. The bios of our fellow speakers, along with a short abstract of their lectures, the list of all participants. We are more than 70 attendees from all over the world, which is really a significant achievement for this 5th edition of the Summer Training School. I'm really glad to see how many people are there. And on the last page, you will find all useful links, including the link to the reading materials and the Zoom link for remote connections. So this is what I wanted to share with you before I hand over to our distinguished speakers. The first speakers of today, Professor Christopher Hein, who is already online. I have few technical announcements to make. First of all, attendance to the summer training school will be verified regularly. We will download the list of the participants for a remote participant at the beginning of each training and teaching session and at the end of each training and teaching session. And we are, passing a paper here in the room for signatures of on-premise participants. Attendance at the summer school, therefore, will be verified. And in order to do this, please log in with your name and surname if you are online. And I kindly invite you also to turn on your camera for, verification and also, to make the participation more lively. So please turn on your camera if you want to be recognized as a participant. Participants must attend at least 80% of classes to receive a certificate of attendance. Local students, so UNITU students, will also receive the credits, 8 credits, if they attend 100% of the lectures and trainings. That means that for local students having granted credits, it is necessary to attend the whole summer training school without missing any class. All lectures, seminars, and training sessions will be in English and recorded. Okay, I think that's it. The background image of the booklet is a painting by an 11-year young girl who won a prize, an international prize on peace, for this drawing. Take a minute to look at that drawing on your booklet. The title is We Are All Connected. This is, the core idea laying at the foundation of community sponsorship and competing models. And we really would like to provide you some insightful understanding of this attempt to shift the paradigm from the predominant idea of closure of the borders and externalization and containment. So this is the idea we would like to share with you. And now it's time to start. A special thank to my dear colleague and friend, Professor Mario Savino, for sharing the organization of this course, and to Giulia Del Turco for her invaluable support, along with all the trainers who I have already mentioned. Thank you for your attention, and welcome again to this 5th edition of the Cosme Into Me Summer Training School. I guess we are almost full, we have the full participation now, so I kindly invite the first speaker of the summer school to take the floor. I'm trying to see if I find Professor Hein on the screen. Christopher, are you there?
I am here, yes.
Yeah, great. Thank
Good
you so
morning.
much. Thank you so much. You are Professor Christopher Hein is a key professor expert of the topics we are going to investigate. He teaches at Luis Guido Carli. He teaches at Luis Guido Carli in Rome, and he has a significant background also in the organization in the third sector and organization, former president of the Italian Council for Refugees. It's my honor and pleasure to have you here, Christopher, today to give the introductory lecture of the summer training school. So I'm going to give you the full power to share the screen for your presentation. Okay, let's try if you can share the screen. Okay, we don't see it, but if you do you want me to share the presentation?
Please, yes, would be easier.
Okay, so you can close the window and we will share the presentation. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe.
Perfect.
No. Just, yeah. Okay, I think. Okay. Thank you very much, Christopher. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela. Really, I'm very happy to be with you virtually at the Tuscia University, unfortunately not being present physically. And good morning to everybody who is connected or there in the university room in Viterbo. Thank you very much for inviting me to have this initial lecture of the summer school on such an important topic as it is the community sponsorship and complementary pathways to Europe, first of all, but also in comparison to similar models and challenges in other parts of the world. I understand my lecture as an opening session of the summer school of these days that you will go more and more into more details of the question. And I think it is important to remind what we are speaking about. What is the real context where we stand today? When we speak about complementary pathways, when we speak about resettlement, when we speak about the participation of the civil society through sponsorship models and community sponsorship. During the last 2 years, 2023 and 2024, we had slightly more than 1 million asylum seekers in the 27 member states of the European Union, plus Norway and Switzerland, out of whom some 650,000 people have got the protection status of various nations. It's not since they are under or they do not like all the individual asylum procedure. So on the one hand, we have an impressive number of more than 1 million people requesting protection, some 65%, including those recognized under the second instance by the judges on appeal, including those, some 65% get protection. Thus to say, when sometimes it is said in the public opinion or from politicians, the abuse.
Christopher.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We're having some troubles in hearing your voice. Maybe if you can speak a little bit closer to the microphone. Let's try, because we can barely hear you.
Oh. So you didn't hear what I said up to now?
Not really.
Not really. Okay, let me see.
There is an echo. There is an echo. Yeah.
No.
Let's try.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
No, it doesn't work, unfortunately. Maybe
Hello?
let's try
Oh.
maybe turning off the camera. Maybe the connection is better if you turn off the camera and just speak. Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it seems we can hear you a bit better. Yeah, I don't think there is an issue with the other participant, Camilla. It's just the connection by Professor Hein, so don't worry.
It is the problem is on my part, yes, you said? Okay.
Yeah.
Is it a little bit better now that you can hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you a little bit better.
Okay, I have here a message from Chiara that she can hear me better now. Okay, fine. So just to summarize what I said, we had over the last 2 years, each year more than 1 million new asylum seekers in the European Union, apart from those who have come in this period from Ukraine as refugees under the special regime of temporary protection. We had some 65% of those who requested protection who got in one way or another protection, whether international protection or national schemes of humanitarian or special protection. And you can take that 95% of these people, when they come from countries of origin where you need an entry visa for entering the European Union's member states, 95% of those have arrived in an irregular manner. And over the last 10 years, we had more than 30,000 people dying in the Mediterranean on the way to the European Union and on the way to present a protection request. I think we have to include our discussion on complementary pathways and on community sponsorship within this context. It is not a technical question. It is a question about, in a certain way, of the survival of the European Union as a gathering of states committed to human rights and respect of human dignity, that at the same time, directly at its doors, in particular in the Mediterranean, but also on the Balkan route, or prior to arrive at the Mediterranean in the desert of North Africa, have every day people dying only because they have no possibility of entering legally the member states of the European Union. This is where we speak about. And this is certainly not a new thing. We are speaking, and I'm sorry to say this, for you, you are younger and cannot remember it so easily, we are speaking about old wine in new bottles. I had the big pleasure 23 years ago to organize here in Rome an international conference with the participation of 30 states under the Italian presidency of the European Union and with the support of the European Commission. Here is, okay, now I have no video on. This is the report of that conference under the title, Towards More Orderly and Managed Entry in the EU of Persons in Need of International Protection. This has been the wording at the time. More orderly and managed entry of persons in need of international protection. We are speaking about the debate beginning of the century. And also there, very few years after the entry into force of the Amsterdam Treaty that for the first time gave a legal possibility of the European Union to intervene with jurisdiction over questions of refugees, asylum, and migration in general. The term was not yet at the time, legal pathways or additional or complementary pathways, but managed entry of people who need or may need international protection. And there's been also an intervention from the representative of the Canadian government at that conference. And he was the only one who spoke about, already at that time, community sponsorship. Canada, as you may know, has started already community sponsorship in the frame of its resettlement program in 1980, long time ago, maybe the first one in the world. A model standing there, also when, as Daniela now rightly said, we are speaking about the construction of the European model of community sponsorship. So this is where we start from. And therefore, I think it is so important to strengthen the aspect that community sponsorship is not only about bringing together in one exercise the public and the public-private partnership, but what is the purpose of that partnership? It is to promote, to increase, to open more the possibilities for people to arrive in a legal way. The other fact, and which is part of this background, is that according to UNHCR, more than 75% of all refugees in the world are living in the neighborhood of the countries of origin. And that means mainly in less developed countries, mainly in continents where there's very difficult for the local population already to survive under present circumstances. And these countries, the first arrival countries, countries of first refuge, host the vast majority of all refugees in the world. So certainly resettlement and other complementary pathways is also a tool of solidarity, international solidarity sharing with those countries who have taken and still take the major burden of protecting, hosting, and assisting refugees. And at the same time, and this is also important as a feature of the context we are speaking about, we have in many, not to say most European countries today, the very heavy demand of the labor market to have foreign workers. We have everywhere a demographic decline. We have an overaging of the society. We have a threat to the welfare systems and to the social services because of the overaging. And this will be so in the future, at least according to United Nations, until 2050. So it is not only that in this precise moment we have a strong demand for foreign labor, but this will be a fact that will accompany us at least for the 25 following years. And this is in a certain way new, that this is also now in the opinion, the public opinion, and it is discussed or initially discussed that we cannot just go on in this way and not to develop policies that allow people to arrive legally and in a protected, or as in that conference said, managed entry into the European Union. And at the same time, and this is for me personally, I can tell you, I've seen so many tragedies in the Mediterranean in my professional life, for United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and for the Italian Council for Refugees, the tragedies that are consumed there in the waters of the Mediterranean. If through these tools and through also the community sponsorship, we have the possibility of reducing the number of victims, then it would be already a great thing. Okay, if you have this introductory remark, if you have any questions or remarks to this, please interrupt me immediately. If it's not the case, could we just go one step back in the slides to put the first slide on? We have got here the definitions and objectives. Could you go to the first slide, please? No. Can you hear me? Yes. Could you go a moment back in the presentation, in the PowerPoint presentation? No, not forward, back. Okay. We
Christopher, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. There is an hand raised. I don't know if you want to keep all the questions at the end.
Okay, I will see the hand raised, yes.
As you wish, as you wish. If you want to keep them at the end or...
Okay, please, yes, certainly. Adama, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning to Professor and to also Professor.
We can't...
Good
A
morning.
little bit louder, please.
Good morning to all of you, and good morning to Professor and Professor Vitello as well. I'm grateful to speak also. that this summer training will have a long way to impact all of us in honing our skills with regards to migration laws and policies and integration policies as well. However, my question will be directed to Professor Ms. Hertz, I believe. With regards to the interrelationship and the connection between the private sector and also the community with regards to migration and with regards to durable migration. How do you vision that there may be issues of conflicts of
I can hear you.
interest with regard
I can't hear you anymore.
Yeah, it seems that he is freezing. Adama, maybe you can type your question in chat so that Christopher can reply to you.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe if you want to continue, we will send a message
Okay.
to.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Would it be possible to go to the first slide of my PowerPoint presentation?
Which one? The first one?
The first one, yes. Okay, here we are. Here we are. Thank you. So, what are the keywords we are speaking about? We are speaking about admission to the territory, about resettlement, humanitarian corridor, humanitarian visa, protected entry procedure, the referral of persons to be in these programs included, the partnership public-private, the legal status of a person after admission, and the reception and integration, family unification, and certainly about the concept of vulnerability. So let's see some of these keywords, what's about, and the definitions of it. Could we go ahead? Could we go forward? Okay, this I mentioned already. There we are. These are the memory of that international conference on resettlement and on protected entry procedures. Just to add, at the time, the European Union had commissioned, the Commission had commissioned two studies, feasibility studies on resettlement and on protected entry procedures that were presented at that conference. And it was already said at that time that at least the protected entry procedures would be a tool to able to reduce the number of irregular or illegal arrivals and therefore of victims on the way to Europe. Yeah. So resettlement has been defined at the time already as selection and transfer of refugees from a state in which they initially sought protection to a third state, which has agreed to admit them with permanent residence status. This is actually one condition also for UNHCR, that the person once admitted under resettlement gets a permanent residence status, whether as a refugee under the terms of the 1951 Geneva Refugee Convention or in another way. It has been questioned already there if resettlement is an alternative to asylum. In particular, the Canadian representative has presented that question, or a tool for states to reduce admission of asylum seekers. And of course, the response has to be no. It is not that you opt for one or for the other. You have to reflect under the international legal regime. You have to reflect on persons who spontaneously arrive at your borders and present a request for protection and you have to evaluate if rejecting this person would be a violation of the principle of non-refoulement. So resettlement and other legal pathways are certainly not an alternative to asylum and to the evaluation of the validity of claims for protection of those who arrive spontaneously. Just to say that except for the Canadians, there was not yet a community sponsorship, you know, and Daniela mentioned it, it is a relatively recent concept, at least for Europe, invented after 2015, after the so-called biggest European refugee crisis in some 10 years ago. Protected entry procedure, the PEP, is a mechanism by which non-national may approach the potential host state outside its territory with a claim for international protection and is granted an entry permit in case of positive response, preliminary or final. So in a nutshell, it is sometimes called also an embassy procedure, where you go to a diplomatic representation of a state and you present a protection request there, not at the border, not at the moment of entering that territory, but before at the representation. And then there is various hypotheses about the procedure to follow. At the end of the day, also there, it could be an opening situation for community sponsorship in support of protected entry procedures. Could we go to the next? So admission is the authorized and legal entry of a person into a country of which she is not a citizen. And now we come to the conflictive definition of community sponsorship. I know that my colleague who will make the other lecture this morning will go also deeper into it, in particular with regard to the question, is community sponsorship a tool for opening the way of legal entry or not? For UNHCR, it is not so. For UNHCR, community sponsorship is to support the reception and integration of refugees already present in the country, not those who are still in the first country of refuge, but already here. So that for community sponsorship for UNHCR, there's no link to admission or legal pathways. This by UNHCR is called then private sponsorship, when individuals, for example, sponsor the arrival of family members, as we see it in a number of non-European cases in the history of private sponsorship in, for example, Australia and New Zealand, but also in Canada. So why it is so? Why is UNHCR, to say so jealous or so limited with respect of the definition of what is community sponsorship? Because they fear, and I have to say rightly perhaps, that if it is opened up to the private, to the public, to the private sector, to community organizations, to determine who may enter under such a scheme, then there is the risk that what is for UNHCR so important, the question of vulnerability, and for a tool for those who mostly need immediate protection elsewhere, is not reflected. There may be other or more selfish motivations to sponsor a person, not necessarily those who may be the most difficult ones to integrate then into the host society. I see that Adama has another question. Let's see if we can hear you now. Please go ahead. Please.
I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry.
Okay, now it's better, but a little bit louder, please.
There was an interruption with regards to network. Very well. My question will still be
No, sorry. Sorry, we cannot hear you.
Asking previously, with regards to when
Hello, can you hear me? Adama, I'm sorry, but we cannot hear you. So could you please write in the chat? I think we texted you so that you could write your question in the chat, and maybe Professor Hein will have time to answer you towards the end of the lecture. Would that be okay? Professor Hein, could you please maybe continue, and I will message Adama
Fine.
again so that he
Fine.
can.
Fine. I'm
Thank you.
sorry, Adama, but we cannot hear you. Please write down there. Yes. So UNHCR, as you may know, and as it will be discussed also in these days, is in a unique position internationally to be that agency to serve as a referrer of candidates for resettlement, at least for resettlement, maybe not for other forms of humanitarian admission. But for resettlement in the technical sense, it is only and exclusively the UNHCR in UNHCR view. And there is a question, but this is a policy question for the future, and there it is also important, that it is addressed in these days here. Is it necessarily so? Should always UNHCR has the, let's say, monopole position of referring refugees for being resettled in another country, or could it be also other schemes? I remember, for example, that in Denmark, the selection of candidates for resettlement was done by joint missions between officials of the Danish government and the Danish Refugee Council as a private community entity. They both went together, the state and the private organization, to select in refugee camps in Africa and Middle East, and so those who could be resettled to Denmark. So they may be alternative. And actually, in the guidelines of the European Union, very recently published in December last year, guidelines to EU approach to community sponsorship, we see that the support is motivated by the broadest strategy of the EU for increasing admission places, and fostering effective integration through partnership between states, civil society, and private individuals. And it is said their community sponsorship has the potential to increase the number of admission places. So you see there, it is not just about reception and integration support. It is not just about the social part of the whole question. It is also in the substance of being a tool within the admission policies. Next slide, please. Thank you. Will you see the next slide? Yes. So resettlement, you will speak more in detail about it, certainly. As Daniela mentioned already, we have now, and it is already in force since 11 June last year, the EU framework regulation on resettlement and humanitarian admission. It is important to underline it is not just about resettlement, it is also on the different forms of humanitarian admissions that would include, for example, also what in Italy is called the humanitarian corridor. The objective is, and here we are in the heart of the legal question, the objective is that there is a framework for efforts of the individual member states. The individual member states, when they proceed with resettlement or humanitarian admission schemes. But the problem is that the European Union cannot oblige a member state to admit any refugee from a third country. This is outside the legal scope of the Lisbon Treaty, the basic treaty of the European Union. So therefore, this framework regulation is on a voluntary basis. It is for those states who voluntarily adopt a scheme of resettlement and humanitarian admission. And the same question also for community sponsorship. You can have on a state regulation, and we do it in Canada and Australia, New Zealand, now even in Japan and Brazil and Argentina, a national scheme for how does it work, the community sponsorship. But the state cannot say you have to sponsor. There's no legal obligation possible. So we are in a strange area, legally speaking. Yeah? We have a legal concept of asylum. We have the legal concept of the prohibition of the refoulement of a person who may risk for life or liberty in another territory. We have a human rights limitation, yeah, of deportations and of even extradition of a person. But we have no possibility of obliging the state to admit in a refugee or an asylum seeker. And this is, to my mind, is what has to be discussed, and this is in the heart of the question. But unfortunately, as long as there will not be a reform, constitutional reform of the European Union here in this continent, it will not be possible that Brussels, the European Union, will oblige a member state to resettle or to admit anybody. Okay. Next slide, please. So humanitarian admission, what is the difference with respect to resettlement? According to the framework regulation, it means admission to the territory of a member state, following where requested by a member state, a referral from the European Union Agency for Asylum, from UNHCR, or from another relevant international body of a third country national or a stateless person from a third country to which the person has been forcibly displaced. So here we have clearly a difference. The referral does not necessarily is from the side of the UNHCR, but could be from the in Malta-based asylum agency of the European Union, but could be also, according to the national legislation on humanitarian admission, by others. For example, you take the example of Italy with the humanitarian corridor. There, these private organizations are those who refer to the consulate services of Italy for the issuance of a humanitarian visa, the names of the person. This is totally different from what we have in the resettlement exercise. Can we go to the next? Okay, I will not, also because of the limited of time, go too much into these details about the international legal framework, just to mention that we have only a framework of soft law. For example, the 2018 Global Refugee Compact, where you have a mention of community sponsorship and an appeal, let's say, of the international community to support the idea of community sponsorship that are additional to regular resettlement. Again, you have here, because of course the text of the Global Refugee Compact is a text written by UNHCR. So it is again the UNHCR language to say this is additional to regular resettlement. It is not within the regular resettlement. Okay, next one, please. I see here another question. I beg your pardon, I will respond to the question when I have finished my presentation, yeah, because otherwise we jump too much from one thing to another. So who is eligible? This is a very important question. Among these so many millions, tens of millions of refugees in the world, who is eligible for being resettled or for being included in humanitarian admission procedure? And there, first of all, we have, of course, people who would qualify for convention refugee status in the terms of Article 1A of the 1951 Geneva Refugee Convention. So people who fear, the well-founded fear of persecution for one of the reasons mentioned in the convention. Secondly, with regard to the European Union's people who would qualify for subsidiary protection, who would risk a serious harm if they remain in their home countries, in particular when it is a threat to be tortured or subject to inhuman treatment, or people who are in armed conflict in their countries of origin. And then the third possibility, national protection, and this is important. In a number of European countries, you not have only the refugee status and the status under the subsidiary protection, but also national protection, sometimes called humanitarian protection. In Italy, for example, now called special protection, with different schemes. Also, this can be an element for, or sufficient element for, the eligibility of a person to be admitted under these schemes. And then there is another set of criteria, which is regarding not the protection need, but the personal circumstances. So first of all, vulnerable groups, persons with medical needs, persons with disabilities. This is all mentioned in the framework regulation of the EU, and people with legal or physical protection needs in the country where they stay, and for persons for whom there is no foreseeable, durable solution possible, in particular those in protracted refugee situations. We speak about people in refugee camps in Africa, for example, who are there for years and years and no solution is in sight. And of course, there should not be any exclusion grounds among the exclusion grounds foreseen in the 1951 Refugee Convention. And family members of eligible persons should be eligible as such, as family members, including also siblings of the person. So this is important to underline here. It is an opening regarding the traditional resettlement aspect of admitting only people who would qualify for convention refugee status. Here we have a far broader approach, and I think this is for a future EU framework of really from the model of community sponsorship important to take into account this broader eligibility criteria. Can we go to the next slide quickly? Okay, I will not go into details here. You can see it also on the slide afterwards. It is just the steps to be undertaken, from the referral, from the selection in the countries where the people stay, to the admission, to the finally to the integration, and also to the acquisition of citizenship of the country where they are received. Okay. Next one. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, there is financial incentive. This the European Union can do. They cannot oblige member states to resettle or to admit for humanitarian reasons anybody, but they can give financial incentives, and this is actually done under the FAMI program, the Fund for Asylum, Migration and Integration. Please go on. As it was already said, for Europe, the community sponsorship and also resettlement as such is a new thing. We have from there on a total number of 5,000 places only in the beginning, but then we had an appeal from the European Commission for resettlement places in favor of Syrians, in particular Syrians, but also Iraqi and Afghan refugees in Turkey. That was a clear signal, to say, okay, to reduce the number of irregular arrivals from Turkey to the Greek islands through the possibility of a legal admission policy. And this again depends on the willingness, on the political agreement with the member state, and cannot be an obligation. So in a relatively short time, over the last 10 years, the number came from a very low start to 130,000, of whom 43,000 Syrians have been resettled, and 52,000 people have been admitted under the various humanitarian corridors and humanitarian schemes. I think this is impressive. Yeah, you start from almost zero and you have a kick, to say so, and we bring it now to a level which is always very low when you compare it to more than 1 million spontaneous arrivals of asylum seekers. It is really very low. It is not yet certainly an alternative for people to stand in line, to opt for being included in the legal admission, and rather than to pay smugglers and to risk their lives. It is not yet on the level that you have really that alternative, but we are on the way to it. And therefore, I think it is so important to remind that our exercise here on community sponsorship is on the road towards a future where maybe we can overcome what is the incredible story of these numbers of hundreds and thousands of people who are moving irregularly because they have no legal means to do so. So for years 24 and 25, the member states so far have pledged 61,000 places between resettlement and humanitarian admission. Could you go to the next? Coming back to more precisely community sponsorship. There is no mention at all in the framework regulation on resettlement and humanitarian corridors or humanitarian admission, but there is a mention in a recent note, very recent note of 12 March this year of the European Commission, the Migration and Home Affairs, that say the EU promotes community sponsorship schemes to give civil society organizations, communities and groups of individuals a stronger, more structured role in the reception and integration of refugees arriving through legal avenues, including for study and work purpose. But here again, you have the point more on reception and integration, and not so much following UNHCR, let's say, doctrine, not so much on being involved as a community membership in the admission procedure. No. On the other hand, we have the guidelines already mentioned to the EU approach to community sponsorship, the guidelines of the Asylum Commission of December last that focus on the admission. You see, we have in a contradictory, we have from the same European Union contradictory signals and messages. Yeah, what is really the meaning of the community sponsorship, where it is placed, what is the purpose? And we are in the process of formulating better because we have to overcome this confusion we have in this moment, unfortunately. Next one. You will have in these days, tomorrow and the day after, some presentations on resettlement programs in other non-European countries, in particular, I think Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. Canada is certainly also for Europe, let's say, the model to be discussed, even if it cannot be easily transferred because it's a different, totally different tradition, historical and economic context. But just to remind, when we speak about community sponsorship, we do not speak only and certainly not first of all even about Europe or the European Union. Next, please. Okay, we drop over the individual countries because you will have presentations on this, I think tomorrow and the day after, more in detail. New Zealand is one of the traditional resettlement countries, but also in New Zealand, the concept of community sponsorship is very recent. Can you go ahead? Here I want to spend the last minutes of my time. when we compare the experiences in non-European countries, North America, South America, Pacific, and recently also in Japan. What are the criteria to compare these different schemes, these different models and experiences, and to see what we can get for the formulation for us, for a model for the European Union? The first question mentioned already various times, but this is the principal question: is it additional to the traditional resettlement schemes with the UNHCR participation? Is it something which goes beyond and which gives the possibility of new and an increased number of places and of avenues for legal admission? And this is different in the various countries, how it is perceived and how it is implemented. Then the eligibility criteria of beneficiaries and the evolution. For example, in some countries outside Europe, we had initially also there only refugees under the 51 Refugee Convention. But then going on, the concept was enlarged to other groups of persons who may need in protection for other reasons. For example, and this is the real question today, persons who need protection because they had to leave their homes because of climate change. And this is the new dimension we have, and this will be probably in the future, the real refugee movement challenge will be those who from various countries and various continents are obliged to leave their homes because their livelihood is destroyed through the consequences of climate change. The eligibility of sponsors, what are the criteria, what do they need to show as sponsors? The naming, that means are the sponsors capable to say, I want to resettle Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, or just to say, okay, we sponsor 30 persons without giving any identification of the names. The naming is one thing which is very important, where you have most frequently, also in New Zealand, Australia, the feature that the community sponsorship is more on the side of family reunification than an additional tool. That means I sponsor a family member refugee in another country to come over here. The naming is one of the criteria. Then, of course, the status of the beneficiaries after admission, which legal status will they have? And then the nature and the duration of responsibility of sponsors. Do they have to pay for an illimited period of time? Normally, you have a limit of time, 2 years, and the question in the case of New Zealand and Australia, sometimes only 1 year. And what is the content of the sponsorship? It is just accommodation and housing, or it's to promote, to assist in finding housing. It is to promote, to assist in finding employment, and so on and so forth. It is providing language courses in the language of the country of destination. So this is another feature to compare the different schemes. I think these 6 criteria are maybe among the most important ones. So I also, because of lack of time, I should like to close my lecture here, but I will go immediately see what are the questions or mentions put in the chat and try to answer this. Just to say, from a very personal point of view, I've been busy for many years in practical refugee work, and now for the last 10 years, I'm in more academic work in various universities in Italy and in Spain. But for me, the question, how does a person in need of protection arrive in the country where he or she can have protection? This is the basic question for the persons and for also the future of any asylum and humanitarian scheme we may invent. I go to the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Christopher. Thanks a lot.
I just wanted to go to the chat, Daniela, if you allow a second.
Can you hear me, Christopher?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this very, very thought-provoking introductory lecture. There are some questions in the chat. And maybe, yes, and other questions here in Viterbo. If you want, I ask the people who raised the question to read them, or if you want to read them. The first question is by Adama Silla. Whether there is likely to be a conflict of interest or not if the private sector is left or included in admission policy or process, considering their need for human resources. So this is the first question. Do you want me to read also? Yeah, okay.
Give me just a second to respond to that question. Yes, there may be a conflict of interest, of course. And we have seen already in the evaluation of programs, for example, those evaluation exercises made in Australia and in Canada and in New Zealand, that there may be a conflict of interest of, on the one hand, attracting family members, or to fill employment vacancies, and not necessarily to embark on those who most are needed for also individual vulnerabilities. I think this has to be very clear in each and every design of community sponsorship and private sponsorship, that there may be the conflict, and to have included in a scheme methods and tools how to approach and overcome these conflicts. But it is there. It is also in the history of what we have seen in non-European community sponsorship schemes. Clearly, a conflict of interest can be there and will be there always. It is not what you can avoid, but it's something what you can address. Okay, other questions?
Thank you.
How can individuals...
Thank you. Yeah, I will read the second one. How can individuals at risk within their own country seek asylum if they cannot leave? How can individuals facing danger within their home country apply for asylum if they can't reach another country or cross their borders, especially in states without UNHCR branch? As you have noted, very few countries have established legal framework to cover such situation. While models like Australia's private sponsorship program exist, they are often limited in scope. This was the question by Ala.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's a very interesting and very good question. Take the recent example of Afghans, after the seize of power of the Taliban. So how could they leave the country? People who feared persecution, very harsh persecution, people who were being militantly against the Taliban advancing over the precedent years. They had to fear for their life. How could they leave the country? How could they get protection? And actually, there is on the international legal level no possibility, I can tell you, because also when you see the refugee definition, refugee is always a person who is already outside his or her country of origin. So there have been examples where, for example, after the coup of Pinochet in Chile, where people could enter an embassy of another country, and could request so-called diplomatic asylum in the embassy. This has been also the case in Europe once, in Budapest after the Soviet invasion in Hungary in 1956. People have entered the US embassy in Budapest and got protection in the embassy, but then they couldn't leave the embassy for a long time. But only in the Latin American continent, you have a legal framework, you have conventions on diplomatic asylum. You do not have it in Europe, or this is where we stand. Okay, there is an unstable connection of. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yes. So it is a real question. I think the only possibility will be on the protected entry procedures. If they are designed in such a way that they do not only open the possibility of contact a diplomatic representation in a third country, but in some instances also in the country of origin, then it is a physical question, logistical question, how to enter really the process of an embassy. This is a different view. Can inside the premises of an embassy is almost the only possibility you have when it's so difficult to run away, to say it, from your country where you fear persecution. Okay. Then I have here a question. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, there is also, thank you, Christopher. There is also another question in the chat. I'm reading it. It's by Laclida. Speaking about the reliance on private citizens and communities to host refugees, does it shift responsibility away from the state? And if so, is this desirable or dangerous?
Really, you put very pertinent and interesting questions, I must say. Also, this one here. What is the balance between state responsibility and the voluntary taking over of responsibility through an agreement, through, let's say, if I sponsor a person, if I sponsor a refugee, I have to sign an agreement. I have to commit myself that I pay for this. This is an obligation under the public law. And this takes away in a certain way obligations of the delegation of the state, of course, to minimum human conditions for under the jurisdiction of the state, whether own nationals, whether foreigners, whether asylum seekers or other persons. So here again, it is a question of balancing. I think that the responsibility is shifted over in a certain way, outsourced, to say, outsourced from the state, from the public to private entities is not such a new thing. In the welfare world, take that you need an ambulance, you need a transport to a hospital. You have all these private organizations who take care. The charity organizations in many countries in the world, in particular also in Europe, they collaborate with the state on providing services from birth to the end of the life. So we have models of transfer, of outsourcing responsibilities of the state. Only normally it is the state to pay the private entities and not the other way around. In the community sponsorship, it is a financial participation, a financial self-commitment of private entities or even private persons to commit themselves to pay a certain amount or to deliver certain services for the state free of cost. And this is precisely one of the advantages for the state to say, also to the public opinion, to the voters to say, okay, we admit 10,000 persons more, 10,000 refugees more, but be quiet, we do not pay for it. It's the private sector, it is community sponsorship, they who pay for it. So this is easier, acceptable, politically acceptable, if there are others to pay and not out of the state budget. As such, the question of outsourcing, I think, is not so new, is not so dangerous, But of course, they have also there to be the methods, yeah, to see that not that the state does not simply, let's say, withdraw from legal, international, European, conventional, constitutional obligations with respect to the persons. In ultimately, it's always the state, yeah, responsible, for example, to respect human rights and basic liberties of the person.
Thank you, Christopher. There are further questions both in chat and in the room.
Other questions?
I would switch to the attendees in presence now, and then go back to Deng Toth for the last question. So let's see who wants to raise questions here. Yes, please state your name and use the microphone so that the people at home can hear you. Thanks. Doesn't work? You can try another microphone or come to the front. You can come here. This one. Maybe you can. Here. Yeah, you can sit here. Yeah. So that everybody can see you. You can introduce yourself.
Yes. Sorry. Just. Well, hello. My name is Erekle Kobatadze. You did not have the chance, because of the limited time, to speak about soft law instruments. And my question is about, there was written on that slide that the state has a discretion to determine the amount of asylum seekers that it can admit, and also how to apply the non-refoulement principle. So I want to know, are there any safeguards if a state does not want to fully commit to admitting asylum seekers? And also I have another question. We know, like Professor Vitiello has already said, that there is also an issue of fragmentation, because there is no common principle in European Union how to admit asylum seekers. We know that there is 2 enclaves which border North Africa, which are in North Africa, and they are Spanish territories. They are Melilla and Ceuta. And I want to know how can other countries aid Spain to control the border there, because we know that it is a big issue for Spain, because many asylum seekers from North Africa, from Western Sahara, from Morocco, are going to that border to find a new solution and new way for their lives. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Christopher, do you mind if I collect another couple of questions from the room?
Yes.
And then you, yeah, okay. Prevail. Maybe if the microphone works, you can, yeah. Or if you feel coming here, everybody can see. Yeah, okay.
So thank you very much. My name is Prevail. My question is a bit similar to the same one. It's a bit similar to the same one I was just asked. You spoke about frameworks, the global framework and EU level frameworks. So my question would be to ask, okay, of course we have the principle of non-refoulement, and the question that he asked now was, what are the safeguards if a state refuses to follow? But my question would be, based on the principle of sovereignty, particularly as we see within the European Union, how do you think it is possible to what extent can the EU, within its legal framework and in the light of the principle of sovereignty, establish binding standards that member states would play with? Because we see that it works with national discretion. The way, for instance, complementary pathways work in Italy is not the same way it works in Germany, for instance, or in France. And sometimes, that fragmentation that he was also speaking about. So what's the possibility of harmonizing the legal frameworks, particularly at the EU level? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prevail. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Another question? No? Okay. So there is a question in the chat by Deng Toth. Should you approach community sponsorship incorporate asylum to international students came for study who might felt unsafe to go back due to several instability from country of origin? If yes, under which categories do they fall in? And this was the last question so far. So, Christopher, if you want to reply.
Daniela, I had a problem with audio. Do we speak about the question I see here and the chat from Denk Todd? Should
Yeah.
EU approach community sponsorship incorporate asylum to international students? That question, yes?
Yeah, I mean, if you want, you can reply to all the questions.
Is that yet that question? Yes. Okay, I start with the first one. Fragmentation, yes, of course, we have the fragmentation. If the EU have moved recently to establish a framework regulation for resettlement and humanitarian admission, it is precisely with the purpose of overcoming too much of fragmentation. But as long as you have no legal possibility to oblige states to have these schemes of resettlement or humanitarian admission, as long you will always have a fragmentation because the individual member states are free. Now, it is in their political discretion to do so or not to do so and how to do so. If you have no obligation and you do it, you can do it as you like. So the framework regulation, and we will see also in the future what will say the European Court of Justice on it. It is just a framework, as the name already indicates, and it is an attempt to overcome the fragmentation. But at the end, there is no other way around than to amend the Lisbon Treaty and to provide a legal basis for the union that we do not have right now. You had the other question on Morocco and Ceuta and Melilla. Okay, there is an EU border police agency, Frontex, as you know. Frontex can, of course, assist Spain, as it does in Ceuta and Melilla, as it does also in Canary Islands, with respect to control the borders. In this case, even if it is in Moroccan territory enclaves, it is for the EU, it is an external border. And so the Frontex has a mandate to assist Spain in this undertaking. Of course, you have Ceuta and Melilla, you have the Greek islands, you have Lampedusa, you have other places where people spontaneously arrive, and the member state, Spain, Italy, Greece, whoever it is subject to the principle of non-refoulement. That means cannot simply send the person back where there is a risk for life or liberty for the person. And this has to be evaluated in each and every individual case. And this is linked to the second question, I think. What are the safeguards on the European level? Okay, the safeguards is we have the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights. We have the right to asylum, Article 18 of the Charter on Fundamental Rights. All member states are bound by the Human Rights Conventions, in particular the Human Rights Convention. So you have two judicial mechanisms of supervision. One is the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg with regard to the European Union, and the other one is the Strasbourg Court on Human Rights with respect to the broader number of member states of the Council of Europe who have subscribed the European Human Rights Convention. So if there is a violation of these fundamental rights, there are both possibilities in the case of Strasbourg, even from an individual to go to the Strasbourg Court, which is not possible under the European Union. It is a national court to present a question to the to the Court of Justice of the European Union in Luxembourg. But we have a jurisprudence, we have a very ample jurisprudence, yeah, on what is non-refoulement, on what are the basic rights, even in cases where a person, there are two important judgments of it, even when a person in a third country approaches the embassy of a membership country. In this case, it was in Beirut, the embassy of Belgium. Unfortunately, to my mind, in both cases, anyhow, the claim was rejected. But you have judicial supervision of these basic rights. I don't know if this is answering your question. Please add a more precise question if this does not satisfy you. The last question here is on students. Should EU approach community sponsorship, incorporate asylum to international student? Well, if it is a particular question of students, of refugee students, under the various schemes, you have a program for refugee students, sponsored by universities, through also UNHCR. You may get also in my university, Lewis University, we have signed an agreement with UNHCR on admission of refugee students, and they got a scholarship. It's all free of cost for them. It is a small number, but it is a scheme that is there. So the condition is that actually the person is in need of international protection in this case. And normally you have in the community sponsorship schemes also a part of those persons who are not necessarily only university studies, but also other kind of students who are in an educational process and who can be sponsored for being resettled or for being admitted under other humanitarian regimes. Please tell me if I have satisfied your questions or not.
Okay, thank you very much, Christopher, also, for replying to all the questions. I don't see further hands raised in the room, so I guess we can close this first part of the morning session. There is just a quick final question by Abdul. Okay, so this is the last one we take. What must crucial grounds? Yeah, maybe Abdul, you can speak up because I don't understand very well the question.
Okay. Can you hear me, Professor Vitello?
Yeah, we
Yes,
hear you.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a quick one. I actually wanted to know what most important grounds must an individual put forward before being granted an asylum as far as Europe is concerned, generally speaking.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Very interesting. The question is answered precisely in Article 18 of the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights. It is providing the right to asylum in conformity with the terms of the 1951 Geneva Refugee Convention. And for the Refugee Convention, a refugee is a person who has a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, ethnic origin, religion, political opinion, or belonging to a particular social group, with the interpretation of these terms, which is provided in EU law under the qualification regulation of the EU. So you have a precise legal regime of who is entitled to get asylum. Asylum in the narrow sense, asylum in the sense of the refugee status under the Geneva Convention. Then you have other forms of legal status of persons in need of protection under the subsidiary protection regime, which is, as I said before, mainly designed for people fleeing from armed conflicts or from the risk of being tortured or undergo inhuman or degrading treatment. So these are the two models on international protection, obligatory in all member states. In addition to these two, you may have on a national level additional protection mechanism.
Excellent. Thanks. And of course, Abdu, you will know much more about this topic during the next academic year, as you will have specific courses dealing with those contents and definitions. So thank you very much, Christopher. Many thanks to Professor Hein for this lecture and for the generous answers to all questions. It has been really, really fruitful. We have now 10 minutes break, just 10 minutes break. Please come back on time because the next speaker is already online, and is Professor Berneri, Chiara Berneri from the Open University. She is already with us, and we won't make her wait too long. So it's 11:30, 11:40. Please come back. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it visible? Is it visible to everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe it is, maybe it is, sorry. I just want to share in a way which is not, no. No. Yeah, maybe it's better you share. It's better you. Yeah, but it's small. It's very small.
I can see it. I mean, it's not in slide presentation, but like this is fine.
This one needs to. Can I?
You can, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, does it work? Does it work this way?
Isn't it?
I can see very well.
Okay, I'll do it.
Okay.
No, I will do it from here.
No. It's okay. Okay, so I guess we are ready for to welcome our second guest speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce you Professor Chiara Berneri, law lecturer at the Open University Law School in the UK. Chiara has a lot of experience in the field we are exploring, and she wrote a monograph in 2024 for Hart Publishing entitled Private Sponsorship of Refugees in Europe. She is also part of the COSME project team for the publication of a book on community sponsorship. We are really glad to have her today with a lecture titled Conceptualizing Community Sponsorship in the European Union, an autonomous complementary pathway or a component of legal pathways. And I would also put a question mark at the end of this title, maybe, but we will hear from her if I am correct or not. Thank you very much, Chiara, for your patience, and sorry for the technical troubles. The floor is yours. Take your time, of course. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniela, and to all of you for coming and listening to to this lecture, and thank you, Daniela, and all the team for the invitation. I'm very pleased to come here and present this topic, which is, as you said, part of the book that we are writing together. And yes, it's this specific topic, this conceptualization of community sponsorship, trying to find a conceptual framework, a definition, is particularly challenging. And I have to say, while writing the book chapter and while preparing for this presentation, at some point I thought, actually, you know, there has been a lot of confusion over time, but I thought that the EU and the UNHCR eventually converged in something quite similar, but before, after listening the presentation of Professor Hein, I'm not sure that I'm of the same view. So I would put, absolutely, I'm with you, Daniela. There isn't a question mark here, but if I could, I would add it now. But anyway, I'll start with my presentation, and then, of course, I'm very happy to take questions, because this is an area that soft law area, so there isn't much that is written in stone and that you can get is unmovable. Everything is changing, so there is still a lot to debate and to try to work out together. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is a very, very brief outline of my presentation, just to give you an idea of what we're gonna talk about in the next 30, 40 minutes, whatever it will be. So at the beginning, I would like to start with looking at the UNHCR approach. And I'm gonna do this in a sort of chronological order, because in my opinion, things changed over the years, and now the approach of the UNHCR is much more precise to what it was, for example, in the early documents published in 2018, 2019. After giving a bit of a background from the UNHCR point of view, I will move on and look at the European Union approach, again from a chronological perspective, starting from the early years of after the big crisis following the Syrian war, and then moving on up until the EU-AA guidelines, very recent, of December 2024. Then I'm gonna move on and I'm gonna try to frame the current EU sponsorship schemes within the proposed EU-AA categorization. I'm sure in the next few days you will explore in more details some of these schemes, but for the sake of completeness, I would like just to give you a brief overview of where we stand at the moment in the European Union. And I'm using this term consciously because there are also schemes like the UK one that are well run and still working, but of course I'm not going to talk about this because they are not part anymore of the European Union. And then at the end of the presentation, I would like to draw your attention to what I thought are some of the advantages and shortcomings of the EU-AA proposed categorization. And then very briefly, we will look at the conclusion. Next slide, please. Perfect. Oh, this is the outline, just over there. Perfect. So now we're gonna start with the UNHCR approach and what happened over the years. Next slide. Perfect. So here you can see I put the link to this early document, and a reference to this document is at the bottom of the slide. So if you want to have a look later on, it's quite interesting to understand what was, and to a certain extent, this document is still valid, the approach of the UNHCR on complementary pathways. This is a document of 2019 available at this link. And from this document, I took a snapshot of what the UNHCR describes as third country solutions. And within this group, we have on one side resettlement, and on the other side complementary pathways. And I think I wanted to put this figure because I think visually it's very clear to see how these different phenomena are categorized and conceptualized by the UNHCR. So if you look at this document, according to the UNHCR, you will see that complementary pathways for admissions are defined as safe and regulated avenues for refugees that complement resettlement by providing lawful stay in a third country where their international protection needs are met. They are additional to resettlement and do not substitute the protection afforded to refugees under the international protection regime. And hello, is there a question? No, I could hear some noise. That's okay. So practically speaking, as you can see from the figure, complementary pathways encompass, but are not limited to, initiatives, very different initiatives, such as familiar unification, humanitarian visas, humanitarian admissions, education and employment opportunities, and of course, you can also see community sponsorship of refugees that are also included within this categorization. Next slide, please. Perfect. So here we're still on the same document, the 2019 one, and here I copied and pasted the description. I wouldn't call it definition because I don't think the UNHCR is trying in this document to give like very precise pillars, but it's more of a description of what community sponsorship of refugees are and how they can be categorized. So the first, I would say the first sentence is a bit of a summary, a broad summary of what community sponsorship of refugees are. So community sponsorship of refugees allows individuals, groups of individuals or organizations to come together to provide financial, emotional, and practical support for the reception and integration of refugees admitted to third countries. I would like to stress at the moment, because I think there's a change now comparing to what the UNHCR used to do and the EU AA guidelines. I would like to stress that in this definition, the UNHCR talks about financial, emotional, and practical support, so it's all additional. But there's a change when it comes to the European Union, and we will look at that later. So this is like a broad definition of what community sponsorship are, but then the UNHCR goes ahead and it says, a clear distinction can be made between community sponsorship as a complementary pathway for admission and community sponsorship as a tool to support refugees admitted to other pathway. So to use the words that of the title of this presentation, I think here the UNHCR is starting already to put the seeds of this distinction between community sponsorship as an autonomous admission way and community sponsorship as a component of other pathways. And then the definition goes on and it says, as a pathway for admission, community sponsorship programs allow sponsors to support the entry and stay of nominated refugees in third countries. Conversely, as a tool, community sponsorship can be used as a mechanism to engage individuals and communities in the reception, integration of refugees arriving through resettlement programs or other pathways such as educational and humanitarian. So, distinction here. Like, to put it very simply, it looks like that community sponsorship seen as an autonomous admission system envisages an approach that starts even before the refugees arrive in the country. So there's an involvement of the sponsor in terms. Sorry, I think that there's a sound. Oh, there we go, gone. Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You can?
Hear you.
Okay, perfect. I think maybe there's something, some people are unmuting themselves and sometimes hear some background noise, but now it seems to be fine. Okay, so going back to this, what I was saying, like this difference between community sponsorship as an autonomous admission system and as a component of other legal pathways, it seems that as an autonomous tool, the community sponsorship involves or implies an involvement of the sponsor even before the beneficiaries of the program enter the state. And this involvement is in the admission itself, often through, for example, nominating the refugees. On the other hand, whereas we have community sponsorship seen as tools to support refugees admitted through other pathways, in this case, the admission is beyond what is the responsibility of the sponsor. The sponsor is simply involved in the reception and integration of refugees that arrive through other pathways that could be resettlement itself or other pathways, other complementary pathways, like those that we saw in the figure before, so educational, humanitarian, family reunification, etc. So already since 2019, we seem to have this initial dichotomy, this initial diversification. The other thing that strikes me from this document, and I didn't put it in the slides, but I think, if I remember correctly, if you look at the document at page 5 and page 9, the UNHCR talks about community and private sponsorship. So they use both terms. And that's quite interesting because, to me, it suggested that at least in 2019, now things seem to be much more clear, as Professor Hein pointed out before. But at the beginning, I don't think, this is my personal view, I could be wrong, but to me it seems like the UNHCR maybe intentionally didn't want to be super clear or couldn't be super clear of what was community sponsorship and what was private sponsorship. So at the very beginning, I think they used the term a little bit interchangeably. I don't know why, maybe because the community sponsorship, the European programs were just starting, so they were waiting to see how they would develop. But at least in this document, to me, it's not very clear. This distinction between private and community sponsorship is not starkly clear. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So now, so here we are looking at another document, which is, and sorry, it's should have put it at the top, but the reference is at the bottom. It's the UNHCR operational guidelines on complementary pathways. This is updated to 2024, so it's quite recent. And here, I think we can see more clarity, at least in terms of this dichotomy between private sponsorship and community sponsorship. So in its 2024 operational guidelines on complementary pathway, private sponsorship and community sponsorship seem to be distinguishable. So private sponsorship are third country solutions that should see an increase of admitted people in need of international protection and are characterized by a greater involvement of the community in identifying beneficiaries, facilitating admission and taking on settlement supports once the beneficiary have arrived. So the UNHCR now basically saying, well, private sponsorship imply an involvement of the sponsor from admission to the very end, also reception and integration. But on the other hand, you have community sponsorship that is simply a reception and integration tool that involves the pairing of resettled refugees or people admitted through other pathways with individuals, group of individuals or organization. So I think this change suggests that UNHCR has moved forward from a position where the umbrella terms of private sponsorship and community sponsorship could maybe be used interchangeably a bit, to the view that these two phenomena are different in nature and hence should be clearly distinguished. Interestingly, however, and this is my opinion after having looked at this document, this seemed to have implied a mere changing of terminology, a bit of a change of terminology exercise. Because in the most recent UNHCR view, this last slide that I've showed you, private sponsorship seems to be nothing else or nothing more than what was once labeled as community sponsorship as autonomous complementary pathway to admission. So if you compare the older definition to the most recent UNHCR description, private sponsorship and community sponsorship as an autonomous complementary pathway both refer to situations in which the sponsors support the entry and stay of nominated refugees and are actively involved in this phase, so also in the admission phase. On the other hand, the UNHCR most recent use of the term community sponsorship seem now only to be circumscribed to what was originally envisaged as community sponsorship as a tool or component of resettlement programs or other pathways. So, sounds a bit technical and complicated, but I think to sum it up, I would say originally the UNHCR talked about community sponsorship as, on one side, as an autonomous admission pathway, on the other side, as a component of legal pathways. Most recently, the UNHCR still keeps this distinction, but more clearly talks about private sponsorship, and private sponsorship are those that have, in which the sponsor is involved also in the admission phase, and community sponsorship more broadly. And community sponsorship are these phenomena, where the sponsor is involved in the reception and integration, but not in the admission. This is, I think, over time, what has happened. One second. So I think now we can move on to the next slide. Perfect. And so now we're going to look at the conceptualization of community sponsorship from the European Union approach. Next slide, please. Okay, so here there's not much in the sense of substantive knowledge, but what I thought I would do, I put a chronological list of various EU documents that mentioned community sponsorship since the early beginning of this phenomenon in 2015, up until more recently the EUAA guidelines, which I added in the other slide. So don't worry, you will have the link in the other slide. But I think for your knowledge, I think it would be useful to have these pieces of soft law and communications, etc. You can click on the link and access them and have a look in your own time. I hope I captured them all, but apologies if I missed something, but I think these are probably the most important, most relevant over the last few years. So let's have a look at those one by one, but very briefly. So the EU joined officially the debate on sponsorship of refugees in 2015, when the European Commission, through its European Agenda on Migration, encouraged member states to explore various sponsorship models. The reference explicitly mentioned private non-governmental sponsorships, humanitarian permits, and family reunification clauses. This mention was brief, and there was no clear attempt of adopting a definition. So as you can see, going back to this idea of private sponsorship, community sponsorship, or community sponsorship as autonomous pathway or a component of legal pathway, there's nothing like that in the early documents of the EU. They simply talk about private non-governmental sponsorship, so very, very broad umbrella term. The same approach was adopted in 2017 in the Commission communication on the delivery of the European Agenda on Migration, when the Commission invigorated its plea to member states to explore ways, I'm quoting, to establish private sponsorship schemes where the settlement and integration support for persons in need of protection, including its related costs, can be provided by private groups of civil society organization. And within this communication, the European Commission also called for the development of a pilot project to facilitate these efforts and further explore the possibilities to develop these schemes in the EU. So you can see that there is an increasing interest, not yet an attempt to give a definition, but an encouragement to member states, so to explore different ways. So the call is on the member states. The EU is saying, please try to explore these different ways, try to experiment, and we will back you up. In 2018, and I think this is a very good document, and if you have the time, have a look at it, because it's a feasibility study. And it's a feasibility study published by the Commission. Once again, in this feasibility study, you don't find clear definitions or categorizations of sponsorships of refugees. What the study did was to point out to a wide range of practices, and the study said, well, the European Union has experimented in different ways, and sponsorship of refugees have been proliferating across many EU member states. But no attempt to a definition, although, and I think this is interesting, the study pinpointed a common element that is shared by the schemes that were reviewed. So the Commission didn't give a definition, but tried to find common elements of commonalities among the different schemes. And it's quite a difficult exercise to find these element commonalities, because the European schemes are similar in some ways, but many very different in others. So they have different nuances. But what this common element that the European Commission found is that, and I'm quoting, there is in sponsorship schemes, there is a transfer of responsibility from government agencies to private actors for some elements of the identification, pre-departure, reception, or integration process of the beneficiaries. So, what is important of this statement by the Commission is that there is a common element, which is the transfer of responsibility from the government to private actors in different phases. And again, what are these different phases? Could be the identification. And remember, if we go to identification and admission phase, then we, according to the UNHCR, we should fall within the private sponsorship realm. But then, not just that, also reception and integration. And in that case, we fall into the community sponsorship realm. But again, no clear approach, at least at this point. Then the study went on, and I think it's very interesting to look at how the EU outlined that the EU bodies, EU institutions could get involved in refugee sponsorship scheme with member states in 4 different ways. It could be a status quo way, the way they call it, when they allow individual member states to independently decide whether implement to such schemes. Then soft measures, funding opportunities, and the 4th point was legislative action. So the Commission said, well, we could also propose an harmonized legal framework to standardize refugee sponsorship across the EU. This hasn't happened, so the legislative action is an option that was not accepted by the member states, and so now we are navigating more within the first 3 options. So perhaps maybe not the first, maybe the second and the third. So we are more in the realm of the soft measures that the EU can come out with soft measures to sort of revamp the interest of member states towards community sponsorship, and of course funding opportunities, because the EU is actively funding through AMIF these schemes. Okay. Now, moving on from these feasibility studies, in the 2020 communication from the Commission on a new pact on migration and asylum, this communication specifies that the EU commitment to private sponsorship is confined to funding, capacity building, and knowledge sharing. In this document, while the Commission vaguely expresses the wish of developing a European model of community sponsorship, which can lead to better integration outcomes in the longer term. This is from the document, a quote from the document. The Commission makes this statement, but it does not precisely hint to what this would entail. So how this integration will happen, how this further development of the European model will happen. So it's still quite a vague approach. And again, the document refers both to private and community sponsorship seemingly indistinctively. And this is a bit of, still a bit the current approach, even after the EU guidelines, because if you go on the website of the European Union, there's a link to a glossary where you can search for terms, and if you put community sponsorship or private sponsorship, you will have a page that comes up with the definition, and at some point it says, well, member states call this scheme, some member states call them community sponsorship, some other member states could call it private sponsorship. So even in the definition from the glossary, you don't have much clarity. So this approach of using the term interchangeably was very much part of the EU approach. Okay. Then we have the next document, communication on a new pact on migration. On the same day that this document was published, the Commission also published the recommendation on legal pathways to protection in the EU. And the recommendation openly asserts that private sponsorship and community sponsorship of refugees are terms that can be used interchangeably. And indeed, you can find this at paragraph 26 of this document, where the Commission affirms that community sponsorship of refugees is in some country also referred to as private sponsorship. And so this confirms again what I said before, and also the approach of the glossary of the European Union. So up until very recently, we had a little bit of confusion. But now let's move on to the next slide. So it should be slide number 9, where we look at the further document, the guidelines. Yes, perfect. So this is the document I was mentioning before, and it is the most recent, the 2024 publication of the EU Asylum Agency, and it came in December 2024. So we had a hiatus of more than 4 years, because before these guidelines, the previous document published by the Commission was 2020. And with these asylum guidelines, the EU spoke again about sponsorship, and these guidelines were very much awaited, because many people were asking for a common approach to community sponsorship. So how did these guidelines came about? So the recommendation that I previously mentioned, the 2020 recommendation of the Commission of the establishment of a group to give guidelines, established then this working group that was composed by the EU Asylum Agency, the European Commission, member states, experts, and representatives of AMIF, UNHCR, and YOM. And they contributed to the drafting of these guidelines that are, and it's the guidelines itself that says it, they are a soft law, soft convergence tool, which aims to establish a minimum quality standards for the different phases of community sponsorship across the European Union. So we don't have hard law. We're still talking about soft measures. So with the guidelines, it is possible now to identify an attempt, at least an attempt at defining, or maybe better describing, the phenomenon of sponsorship of refugees. According to the guidelines, and a bit along the lines of the UNHCR description, sponsorship programs should include a structured framework enabled by governments and coordination mechanisms, an admission component, a link to safe and legal pathways to protection, financial and or practical social and emotional support provided by groups of private citizens, and civil society organization, and from these latter groups, a pledge of commitment for a specified period. So, one thing that I would like to point out is, and you remember before when we talked about UNHCR, I said, pay attention to this definition because they're talking about pathways of protection where the sponsor should give financial, practical, social, and emotional support. But here, it's slightly different because the guidelines say financial and / or practical. So they include potentially also schemes that do not provide financial support, but maybe also practical and social. And I will give you, and emotional, I will give you some examples later on. So according to these EU guidelines, community sponsorship can develop into either standalone legal pathways or into models that underpin resettlement, humanitarian admission, and other complementary pathways admissions. And this has been confirmed also by a even more recent 2025 European Parliament briefing, which, following the UAA document, said that community sponsorship can develop in these two ways, as a standalone legal pathway or in two models that underpin resettlement and other complementary pathways. So, basically, what we have at the moment, in my opinion, is something that can be reconducted to the UNHCR approach evidenced in the previous section, where sponsorship schemes would be initially classified as either autonomous pathways or component of legal pathways. That was my initial approach, and this is what, when I read the guidelines and compared to the UNHCR, I thought, there's a continuity thing. But going back to what Professor Heinz said before, that the guidelines also, perhaps they give a bit of a stark distinction, but then eventually refer again to admission, that muddies the water again in terms of community sponsorship as autonomous tool or as independent tool or as component of legal pathways. So my initial positive attitude to this continuity has been a little bit shaken. So now I will put still a question mark. Do we have continuity or we don't have continuity? Question mark. We can talk about this more in the questions, but let's continue briefly because I want to give you a little bit of flavor of what we have at the moment in Europe, and then some conclusions. So next slide, please. Okay, so here we're gonna look at some of the schemes that are available in Europe. Next slide, again. It's slide 11. Perfect. So in the guidelines basically says, okay, we have community sponsorship as autonomous tool. We have community sponsorship as components of other complementary pathways. But the guidelines expressly says, in Europe, we don't have at the moment schemes that fall under the category of community sponsorship as autonomous tool, or if you want to call it, as the UNHCR calls it, private sponsorship. So the EU is saying we don't have examples of private sponsorship in Europe like the Canadian one. So we have no schemes under that category. So the only schemes, according to the guidelines, that we have in Europe are those that fall under the umbrella of community sponsorship schemes as components of legal pathways, of other legal pathways. And within this umbrella, the guidelines subdivide three different groups. The first group is community sponsorship schemes that are linked to admission through state-led resettlement. So the guidelines are saying, okay, in Europe, there are member states that have different resettlement schemes. In some of these member states have developed community sponsorship programs that help these state-led resettlement schemes. And these are some of these examples that at the moment are available in Europe. Some of these examples are listed in the EUAA guidelines. Some others aren't, I added them, but they're part of this category. So one is the NEST program, New Starters in Team of Germany, which unfortunately is temporarily suspended, but we can talk about all these problems that community sponsorship are facing now a bit later. Then we have Community Sponsorship Ireland. We have the Community Sponsorship Program in Belgium. We have the Community Sponsorship Portuguese pilot, which was an amazing project. I was in touch with the organization that was piloting it and trying to scale it up. Unfortunately, they're facing a period of stalemate, and we'll see what happens in the future. We also have the Auzolana program in Spain. And we also have, and this is what I added, some community sponsorship that do not include financial responsibility of the sponsor, which are at the moment the examples of the Nordic countries, such as Finland, Sweden, and also the Netherlands. I think it's important here to stress this point because we go back to what I said before, this idea that the support of the sponsor could be financial, but or emotional or social. So we'll talk about it in a minute, but I added this because I think they're really important addition to the schemes. Following slide, please. Okay. Sorry, is yeah, this one. The communities. So the other group of community sponsorship as a component of other legal pathways that the guidelines envisage are the schemes linked to civil society-led humanitarian mission programs. And here we have the humanitarian corridors of Italy, Belgium, and France. I'm not sure, well, hopefully you'll talk about these schemes more in detail in the following days. If not, we can discuss further in the Q&A. But these are the key schemes in Europe available, and particularly the Italian ones are very healthy, and they're working very well at the moment. Following slide. Okay, so the last group is community sponsorship schemes linked to admission through other complementary pathways. So it's a big group that includes different realities. So what are these other complementary pathways? Some are family, sort of family reunification-based community sponsorship. The examples that I put here have expired. We had, at the strike of the Syrian crisis, we had this program, the SHAP program in Ireland, which lasted 2 months. Now expired, of course. Then a following up program for the people from Afghanistan, when a couple of years ago they had to escape, and this was again temporary. Then we also had family-based schemes that were introduced in Germany at state level. Most of them are expired, although I think something is still continuing to a limited extent, but I will have to double check this. These family-based schemes run for many years and they were quite successful. And then after, beyond family reunification, we also have educational pathways. What we have at the moment, we have the university corridors for refugee in Italy, the Unicore program. We also have the DAD, Leadership for Syria and Africa in Germany. And currently, even beyond the educational pathways, we have a lot of work done on labor programs, still in development phase, so I'm not adding much here, but watch this space because there are quite a few programs being developed at the moment. Next slide, please. I'm reaching my conclusions. I'm aware of time. So just a few words of what I think after this analysis, what could be the advantages or shortcomings of this classification? Next slide, please. So what I see as an advantage, and I have mentioned this quite a few times, is that the EUAA categorization is quite broad. And the example is what I gave you before a couple of times, this idea that the sponsor can give not only financial, but also practical, social and emotional support. And so, and there's so this word is particularly important because thanks to this word, we can include, for example, these Northern European countries' sponsorship, which once were called simply mentorships. And we have a document that was, I think, a document of 2020 that was drafted by YOM with other organizations, and it's all about mentorships. And in this document, the document expressly say, let's be careful, mentorship do not amount to community sponsorship. They shouldn't be confused with community sponsorship, because in a mentorship, the sponsor only gives practical, social, and emotional support, nothing financial. But now, I think, at least this is my view, with this definition of the EU guidelines, we could include the mentorships in the community sponsorship definition. And this is not, if we can do that, then this is not unsubstantial, because by including what was once called mentorship within the definition of community sponsorship, the states can claim benefits, can claim funding from AMIF. So I think this is potentially an advantage of the new definition. Next slide. Slide 16. Okay. Shortcomings. So what I see, and this is my personal view, so I'm very happy to discuss this and even develop my thinking, but I see this EUAA categorization also as something slightly rigid, particularly when they say that at the moment we don't have anything encompassed within the group of community sponsorship as autonomous legal pathway, or if we want to call it in the terms of the UNHCR, we don't have anything that resembles private sponsorship. I think to a certain extent this is true, but perhaps we are missing some nuances. And in particular, I'm thinking about the humanitarian corridors, which according to this classification are included in the community sponsorship as a component of humanitarian pathways. However, if we look at the practicalities of community sponsor, of humanitarian corridors, we know that the sponsor, there isn't a official naming system in the humanitarian corridors, but in practice, that happens as well, because we know that there are volunteers that in loco are approached by people and say, okay, we would like to be moved to Italy, or we even have people that are already in Italy that contact the sponsors and say, look, we know some people that might be in difficulty, so can we please see if they could access the humanitarian corridor? So what I'm saying is that the classification makes sense, but reality is slightly more complicated, and there are nuances that perhaps should be taken into account. And finally, next slide, please. This is a consideration. I don't think it's a shortcoming of this classification or a particular advantage, but in any case, I think it's something that we have to take into account, and it's the discrimination aspect, because when we look at these schemes, particularly those that involve family reunification or educational pathways, we have to consider those that enter through family reunification, but through the standard channels. Because sometimes, and this happens in practice, there have been quite a lot of complaints, for example, I think in Germany, with the Länder schemes on family reunifications, where you have schemes that, for example, allow certain rights, certain benefits, but then you have the standard family reunification route for, I don't know, standard refugees that do not come through the Länder schemes, that allow different rights or different benefits. So there seem to be two standards, and not, of course, not just in Germany, but in other circumstances. For example, when it comes to humanitarian corridors, there was this French academic, I can't remember the name, but that pointed out the fact that there seem to be preferential routes for those beneficiaries, eventually refugees, that come through the humanitarian corridors compared to those that come through standard routes, because their claims are heard much faster, they can get like legal support pro bono, etc. So this discrimination aspect, two standards, double measure, etc., is something that should be taken into account, particularly when we consider community sponsorships as component of other legal pathways, because the comparison is more evident. So next slide, please, and I'll draw quickly my conclusion. Okay, so I think here we have a very welcome categorization that gives more clarity and more certainty. We have a broad classification, which I think can be a little bit rigid at times. We have a classification that perhaps implies that the discrimination aspect should be properly addressed in the future. It's not addressed in the guidelines, but perhaps it's something that we should keep in mind. And then just a thought, given the current situation and the fact that there is a restriction on state-funded refugee programs, the UNHCR is going through funding cuts, perhaps it might be worth thinking about ways to enhance community sponsorship as autonomous legal pathway in Europe. Or, if we want to call it, as the UNHCR, perhaps we could think about creating private sponsorship of refugees in Europe, where there is maybe more even more financial support from the sponsor, and that perhaps could help us to overcome a little bit the current situation that is not very rosy, frankly. But we can discuss more. And thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Thank you, Daniela. Thanks.
Many thanks for this overarching presentation, clarifying a lot about the definitions, and also a lot about the confusion which surrounds those definitions and those models we are exploring today. We don't have a lot of time for the Q&A, but I would allow some people to take the floor. I see an hand raised by Adama. And let me check if there are other questions.
It was a very beautiful insight. You've taken us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adama. Please go ahead.
My question is with regards to, first, it's with regards to the discriminatory part. That is, those refugees that have been resettled by states and have been admitted into other states and reintegrated or integrated. vis-a-vis other refugees that come by way of other pathways, which are more of a kind of singular in nature. For instance, those who come through the community, those who come through the family reunion or through the education program. Don't you think that there's a thin line and there's a very discriminatory pathway between these two sides? That is, those who are settled by states and those who come by way of other programs, that is through other humanitarian or community or family reunion programs. That's one. And two, my other question is with regards to if there is a possibility of this private partners to come on board, that of course there will be conflict of interest with regards to the human resource that these private sectors need. And don't you think also that is also may lead to discriminatory practices in one way or the other with regards to admissions and integration program? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Adama. No, thank you. Well, very good questions. And I think the discrimination side is something that we should be at the forefront of our thinking as academics, practitioners, policymakers, because it's really important and it creates confusion on a practical side, because of course the beneficiaries don't fully well, some would understand, but some others wouldn't fully understand why I'm coming through family reunification standard routes and I have certain rights, but I'm coming through family reunification, humanitarian corridor, whatever, and I have different rights. So I think it's something that should be really addressed. It's a difficult task, I think. To start with your first question in relation to the discrepancy between people that are resettled to the state and by the state, sorry, and people that are resettled to perhaps through a scheme characterized by a community sponsorship element, certainly there are differences. And if you read the most recent research, not necessarily legal, more sort of sociological, and you will see that the integration that is provided by schemes that are characterized by an element of community sponsorship is better and faster than those that are resettled through a scheme that is led just by the state. So there is this problem, of course. However, how do we solve it? My view, I know maybe it's a bit simplistic, but in light of what happens in the Mediterranean and all the treacherous trips that people try just to have a chance for a better life, I would say the more schemes, the better. And I wouldn't simply say advocate for only community sponsorship. First of all, because the state could find it very easy. So say, okay, community sponsorship work better. Why don't we put everything on the shoulders of private sponsors and we go back and we don't do this job? They need to do their part. We still need schemes that are run by the state because they provide more places. We need as many places as possible. I would probably advise the state to look with sympathy and curiosity at what the sponsors do, and perhaps try to provide the same level of service through their agencies. So I think that is really important, but I think this is something that they should do together, right? We should have both running. I don't know if I answered your question.
I guess so. I see other two hands raised, Gatkek and Ala. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, so Gatkek. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks you, Professor, for giving me a chance. I would also commend Professor Chiara for very exhaustive explanations of the, I can say, sociological concepts. So, yeah. So my question is, through understanding of the explanation of the concept, it seems the concept is only considering those who are admitted through legal and complementary pathways. But there are also those who comes irregularly, and they reach the territories of European Union, and they are also seeking international protection, actually. So are there some possibilities for these people to be included in the program? Or it starts when they are already admitted, then it doesn't start in the process? So this is one question. The other question is, through my understanding, the concept seems to be very helpful, but it remains at the disposal of states. I can see, or European Union and the other states. So if it is pushed to be internationalized, could it not be very helpful? Or are there some push or discussions on it to be internationalized and legalized, so that it can be one among the legal pathways that help? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Gat.
Chiara,
Yes?
sorry, would you mind to collect also Ala's question?
Yeah, sure,
Thank you.
sure.
Thank you, Professor.
I can't hear you, Ala. Can people hear Ala?
Just
Maybe you can type the question in chat if the microphone doesn't work while Chiara reply to the other one.
Sure. I can start with the...
Yeah. Try again, please. No.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, so maybe Ala, if you can be so kind to type your question in the chat, I will read it for you. Okay? Okay, Chiara.
I'll start with Gatkek. So thank you for your questions, both very interesting. The first one on irregular, yes, and I believe that the programs are so flexible that could potentially include irregulars. Now, they wouldn't, I don't think they would be, they could not be called community sponsorship, because the community sponsorship as a particular target, as you said, you have the admission of the integration phase of someone that enters sort of for the sake of being sort of resettled permanently to a third state. But for example, when you think about the humanitarian corridors, there were, I'm not quite sure if they're, no, I think they're still working actually. in Cyprus, there are some humanitarian corridors where a memorandum of understanding was signed between the Italian state, the Vatican state, and Cyprus and Greece. These humanitarian corridors were specifically not for people that needed to be potentially resettled, but for people that needed to be relocated, which is different. So these were people that arrived illegally to Greece or to Cyprus, were put in the camps temporarily until their asylum case was assessed, and then either sent back or potentially relocated somewhere else. So the humanitarian corridors in this case were used not as a complementary pathway to resettlement, but as a relocation system. So I think there is potential to think about these schemes with a broader angle. And I think, yes, why not? Because the involvement of the sponsor and the willingness to get involved to a certain extent doesn't necessarily have to target people that need to be resettled, but also people that have illegally entered some countries and live in a precarious situation. So I think, yes, we're not there yet, but this is a potential. And then on your question on the internationalization of the definition, certainly that's an option. Personally, I'm not a great fan of setting in stone definitions in hard law pieces of legislation, because like, for example, in Canada, for instance, the private sponsorship scheme started after the Second World War, and initially it started like a very informal agreement between the sponsors and the government. And eventually, in the 70s, the sponsorship was included in the Canadian Immigration Act. And since then, over the years, we see the program curtailed and restricted to certain extents, the categories of people that can enter or the number of people that can enter. So I don't know. I think often when hard law gets involved, perhaps it gives more clarity. Yes, that's true. But it brings more power and more possibility to restrain rights rather than expand them. So I don't know. I'm still not convinced. Maybe soft law at the moment, at least at European Union level, maybe is the way forward. But I think it's a big question and it's certainly open for discussion.
Thank you, Chiara. There is a last question in chat. Can we consider some of the advantages offered by some institutions, such as the German DAD organization, to some individual with exceptional asylum circumstances as scholarship that are a form of community or private sponsorship? This is considering that they are time limited and tied to specific academic achievement, not permanent and basic support based on their special asylum circumstances. This is the question by Ala.
Yes, I think, well, I also have to admit my limitation in knowledge, because I am not a great expert on the educational programs. But you're right. So they come, I mean, they're great pathways, but they come with a limitation in time, because even the Italian one, for example, you're given like the fees leeway from the university, you're given like the a stipend, etc. But that is time limited. You have it for 1 year or 2 years, depending on the program, and then it's done. And then it's up to the person to either try to remain following the standard rules, so maybe applying for asylum or applying for a working visa or an additional student visa, or potentially to go back to the country. But you know, once you start the program, perhaps you want to continue and to find a job possibility in the country that hosted you and gave you an education, etc. So I don't know. I think there are certainly advantages, because they give the beneficiary a footing in the new country and the possibility to get into the system. But I guess my understanding, and as I say, I'm not an expert in this specific field, but they're probably slightly more precarious compared to a resettlement scheme or to a humanitarian corridor standard way, etc. Yes.
Okay. Many thanks. I agree with you. I agree with you that there might be very tailored forms of sponsorship schemes, especially at the national level. This is part of the flexibility, but also of the fragmentation which goes along with the use of those schemes. Thank you very much, Chiara, for adding another piece to the puzzle of the definition and the conceptualization of community sponsorship. It has been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
There is a very final question. Yeah, we are running out of time, but if you may stay for a further 5 minutes, I will allow the final question. Yeah.
Yes, Professor. We're grateful for the brilliant lectures. We have learned a lot. We have also acquired.
I'm sorry, Adama. We don't have time for further questions. We're just taking a last one from the audience because we're running out of time.
Okay,
Thank you. Very quickly, thank you very much. Just a couple of suggestions. The first one is about the focus on the language, because I think that it is a need and a challenge at the same time. And the European Commission and Europe in general is facing the struggle of definition in all public policies at the moment. So it is really important to work on definitions, although this is bringing us to somehow an over-regulation. And so I think we need to find a balance between the need of defining broader frameworks like the one you mentioned and find the proper measure. And this is the first one. The second one is about methodology. Given that we have not a standalone path, as you mentioned, from a systemic point of view, as a PhD researcher at the crossroad between economics and law, I was asking myself, I found very intriguing the perspective of the comparison between the single elements that we are experiencing in Europe as single tools and, for example, the Canadian experience, which is the most recent. So I think it would be really interesting from a methodology point of view and from a systemic point of view, in order to address properly with public policies the correct domain of analysis, understand what is missing. I mean, is it a problem of law regulation or something more related to the socio-economic system in general? So maybe a comparative analysis, being able to isolate the domains and let us understand what is good at the moment and what is not working could be very useful. Thank you very much.
I think.
Thank you.
Shall I address?
Yeah. And I also asked Adama if he wants to type in chat. So maybe you can read and reply to both because we are quite late. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you so much for your final comments. I think, yeah, very interesting. On your second question, the last one that you posed, I think it's, yeah, when I wrote the monograph on private sponsorship, I didn't do like an empirical study, but this is something that is very much in the back of my mind, and I would like to do it, particularly looking at the humanitarian corridors. And there is something that keeps on coming up in my head, and it is why the humanitarian corridors seem to work, and some other community sponsorship seem to have found a moment of soulmate. And I think there is something, that's my intuition, so I'm at a very, very early phase of this, but there is something to be said about the welfare system. So the specific welfare system where a community sponsorship is flourishing. So like in the humanitarian corridors, we know that most, if not pretty much everything of the costs are on the sponsors. Whereas like in other schemes, this is not the case because at some point the state intervenes, etc. And then the state is already intervening. For example, in the UK one, which is where I live, as soon as the beneficiaries arrive, they are immediately enrolled in the universal credit system. They get all sorts of benefits straight away. And it's immediately, despite the involvement of the sponsor, a much greater strain on the state welfare compared probably to schemes where the welfare of the state is not that affected. So I think different welfare system and different arrangements between sponsors and the state itself in terms of financial commitment affects the success or less success of the sponsorship. So I think there is a lot that could be done in understanding community sponsorship and welfare, this interrelation, I think. And in terms of your first question, yes, definition, yes, I think it's very important. And that's why I think everyone, including myself, welcomed with open arms these EU guidelines, because at least finally we have a little bit more clarity of what we mean by community sponsorship, what can be included within a community sponsorship and what should stay outside. Not perfect yet. I think some nuances are lost, but it's certainly a step forward. And so we can certainly keep on going in this direction and improve. Yes.
Thank you, Chiara. Thanks also for replying to these very challenging questions. It's now time to close the morning session. So have a very nice day, Chiara.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And for the participants, some announcements. We are going to have the training session in let's say less than 1 hour. The training session will start at 2 and will continue until 4:30. you are kindly advised to open the Drive folder. Please let us know if you can open the Drive folder. I would like to show them how to do this. Yeah, so just a second there, I show you how to go to the, how to go to the Drive folder. Should be this one, okay? So if you open the booklet, did all of you receive the booklet? Okay. If you open the booklet, on the last page of the booklet, there is a link to this Drive folder. Please go to the Drive folder, open the first folder, which is titled Training 1. This is the training for today and for tomorrow. So you will start today and you will continue and complete by tomorrow. You will find this presentation. This presentation is illustrative of all the information you need for the training session. What is key is that we have already created the working groups. So you are going to be divided into 6 working groups, okay? 3 online and 3 in presence. So later on, the trainers will illustrate you the working groups and what you will be required to do in the working groups. Each group will have to identify a group leader. The group leader is going to be in charge of presenting the final policy paper for the group tomorrow. In the plenary session. I do recall you that it's a competitive and adversarial exercise, so there is going to be a winning group. All the rest of the information will be provided later on, but for now, just be advised to open the folder at 2 when you come back after lunch, okay? Because here you will find all relevant information. Thank you very much. It has been a very interesting morning, and thank you for your patience. We ran a little bit late, and see you this afternoon. Bye-bye.